All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Meta Musings. ZeroCardinality here with Sotere. How are you doing, Sotere?
Not too bad, not too bad. Thanks for having me. I guess it is kind of our show, so you're obligated to have me.
Thanks for being here to your
Well,
show
thank
at
you.
your
Thank
show.
you.
Yep. As we said in the last episode, which was actually 2 weeks ago, we said we would start off with an unconventional support and discuss it a little bit. And as you can tell by the Teemo on the screen, we're going to talk about support Teemo.
Woohoo!
Now I mean, Soter was actually the one that I first heard about support Teemo from, and it's actually where I first saw it played. So, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I suppose I can. The concept behind support Teemo is you bring, great lane protection post 6 with your mushrooms. You have really great trading in the early levels. Even if you go the standard, support build with GP10s, he does quite a bit of damage. He has that E, which is going to give him, extra damage over essentially everyone else. And of course, he's blind is really, really key. Can help turn around battles, help turn around 3v2s. Obviously, if you're playing against someone who primarily auto attacks, you level that up first. And if they're going in for last hits, you can blind them. If you're ever going to trade, you can throw down the poison dart and just hope that you come out ahead in the battle. And I think most of the time you actually will.
Yeah, and I mean, before we talked about two things about how you really wanted lane presence, and you also wanted late game support to have late game viability. So you wanted to be useful in team fights and stuff like that. So I think we talked about, for example, Janna was good in lane and in team fights. I mean, the blind is good for lane, as you've already said, and the mushrooms give good word protection in lane. But in team fights, I don't know, it seems like Teemo doesn't have as much. I mean, he does have that blind, which can be really useful if put on the AD carry, but I don't know, like, it seems like the range is really short, and it might be hard to actually get that blind on the AD carry.
I mean, it really depends on who their bruiser is, because as a support, your main goal in the team fight should be to protect your own AD carry. As a secondary function, of course, if you can get to the opposing AD carry, that's great. But Teemo does the protection pretty well, because now that mushrooms, activate in about a second, you can really help your AD carry kite. And if they have a bruiser such as Aurelia, or a lot of bruisers really rely on those auto attacks to then do true damage. You can really slow them down and be able to keep your AD carry alive just that much longer. So certainly there's always been arguments as to how good Teemo is later on in team fights, whether he's in the support role or in top lane. Most people have always figured, oh, he's kind of one of the weaker champions, but I think people underestimate how great the really quick activation of mushrooms is. Now that's a second, it means, if you place that down and they're, 300-400 range away from you and they're running towards you, they're going to, tick over that mushroom and get slowed by it on their way to you. So that is certainly, something that's going well for him now that wasn't in the past.
Yeah, but another concern is that he's really squishy, and, champions can just take him down really easily, and it really wouldn't be much of a harm. Like maybe some other supports it might be harmful for them to try to focus. Like if, for example, if you have a Soraka and you try to focus down a Soraka, that is probably not ideal. But for a Teemo, I mean, since you can blow him up really quickly, it won't take that much time, and then you just start focusing the AD carry or something like that.
I mean, I think if you build him just the same way you build any other support, he's going to be, similarly as tanky. He might have issues against AP champions because he can just, obviously get blown up and doesn't have the chance to blind. But he'll actually be more tanky against any sort of bruiser, that's not wholly reliant on spells. So I think that argument might be a little bit unfounded. I mean, I certainly understand where it's coming from. Teemo's always been considered very squishy, but if you're building in the same way as you build other, supports with Heart of Gold, Philosopher's Stone into Aegis, then you're going to be relatively tanky. And it's kind of the same thing if you're playing a Soraka or a Janna. Like, you're not really tanky. The reason you're not focused is because they don't want to waste all their cooldowns on what they consider as a lower priority target. So you have the same thing going for you as Teemo, except Teemo does have that global taunt. So I guess you can kind of wonder, is it better if they focus the support? And if so, then maybe Teemo's the ideal support, because you have that global taunt, people are going to be chasing after you all the time, and if they're chasing after you and you're relatively hard to catch because you have extra movement speed bonus from Move Quick, you have the blind, you have those mushrooms to kite people around, then that just gives your AD carry that much more time to pick away at them, your AP carry, time to explode them. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't really compared his numbers, his stats, side by side with the other supports, but he did relatively recently. Well, it's probably about 3 or 4 months ago. Get a HP per level bonus, so that certainly helps a little bit.
Yep. So, I mean, that's a quick rundown of Support Teemo. I mean, it's a fun thing to try out, and I mean, who doesn't like playing Teemo? So, might as well take the support if you want to. So, yep, that is our little segment on the Support Teemo. So now let's move on to the real meat of the show, and I think we've been really excited to talk about this for a while now.
Yeah, we've tried to get it into every one of our shows, but finally, this is the one that we're going to go all in with.
Yep, and that is basically changing up the lanes. This is really, trying to change up the meta at its foundations. And the one we want to talk about is going with a 1-3-1 lane setup. So basically, you would have 3 mid and 1 for each of the top and bot lanes. And this really only... Well, first, this is with a very specific team composition in mind. So, I mean, do you want to run down some of the stuff that the team needs for it to work, or for it to even have a chance of working? All right. So first,
I'll jump in later.
So first, what you want to do is you want to have a bot lane that can 2v1. Because that is what they are going to be doing. So, for example, an AP Janna works. I've seen I think Cho'Gath could work. Basically, champions like that work really well. I really like the AP Janna bot because, I mean, Janna can just really farm safely, and Janna just does really well in 2v1 matchups. And then mid, you want to run a composition that can push early and push hard. So... for example, you might run with a Nunu, a Caitlyn, and a Soraka. And one of the things that's good about the Nunu is since you don't have a jungler, you have that Nunu with Consume. So, I mean, that's you have that going for you. And you have the boost of the attack speed for Caitlyn. And Soraka has her Q to help push, and the heal, so... for taking down towers, and really you want to take that tower down as early as possible. And one of the things that you can do is run promote on one of the 2 support champions going mid, for example on a Soraka, and the Soraka can just promote a cannon minion, then put the heal on it once it takes a little bit of damage, and that armor buff will keep it up for a really long time. In early game, that can really help push down towers really fast, especially with Caitlyn's long range. And the idea is that you're going to have the tri-lane mid, you're going to be able to zone out the enemy champion, the enemy AP mid, and you're also going to be able to push and try to take that tower down. And after you take that tower down, you basically want to kind of switch on over to take another turret, or keep pushing more, depending on how the enemy team reacts. Now, what they're probably going to end up doing is send the support mid, have the jungler try to gank, because that's really the only way you can deal with, 3 champions mid. So, I mean, it's basically an early game push strat, and you're just trying to keep up the pressure from the very beginning and just push the entire way.
Well, I mean, I think you covered all the basics pretty well. It reminds me of a kind of unusual strategy. I forget who actually used it. I think it was on one of the the Asian servers or Asian tournaments where they took an early dragon, like at 2 minutes 30 seconds in or whatever it spawns, they took an early dragon. And this is kind of the same idea. It's like, okay, let's take early objectives, get that early tower. You're going to deny them of that map presence. And I feel like a lot of people aren't going to like the idea of taking promote, but taking down turrets is a big part of the game. Like, if you get into an end game and you suddenly, like, their team has all their turrets and you don't have any of yours, you lose. But but more seriously, like when you go towards mid game, like you suddenly start looking around and you're like, oh wow, we haven't taken any of their turrets, and that like denies you a lot of map presence, and it denies you all that global gold that you could have achieved had you just grouped up earlier and pushed. And there's almost always an opportunity to push down turrets. A couple other notes that we really need to take care of if you're going to do this strategy is make sure you secure all your buffs.
Oh yes, okay. the level 1 buffs. Actually, well, I mean, I probably should have mentioned it, but you really want to take your buffs at level 1. So you have, I really like Nunu in this comp because he has that consume, which can really help secure those buffs. So ideally you would have both buffs taken at level 1, and you could, give that blue buff if possible to your 2v1 lane so that they have all the mana they need to cast their spells to farm safely.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and of course red buff could go middle, would really put a lot of pressure on the opposing middle, would help out, if any ganks came in, so that means you're relatively safe for the four levels or so. When you're going to have that red buff, a jungler's not going to come in and want to go 2v3 when your AD carry has a red buff. And there's ways to deal with the jungle, and for one reason, I would kind of like Ashe, because you could level up that E and then you make a lot more in the jungle. So that middle lane is going to have to either do one of two things when they go into the mid lane, when they go into the jungle. Either one, like counter jungle their own jungle, meaning, take all of the minions except one in the camps, in the wolf camp, in the wraith camp, so that they cannot be picked up by the opposing jungler, because you don't want the opposing jungler to rush to 6 really, really fast, because that'll give them a sizable advantage. So you can counter yourself, or you can just go ahead and pick up those, camps every time they're up. And you should have time to do that, and you should have time to, decide when you're going to push and when you're going to, lay off, let them farm a little bit, but you pick up all those buffs. So your carry in the mid lane is going to get more farm than usual. And lately we see, AP carries, of course, getting the most farm in competitive games because they have the Wraith camps, the Wolf camps, the opposing Wraith camps, all to clear out for themselves. So suddenly, every minute they're getting an extra potentially, 11 more CS, which is pretty ridiculous. And especially if you have someone like Ashe who can take advantage of that and getting an extra 5 gold per kill, that would be really, really big. But she's not really an ideal champion to do it otherwise because she's not quite as safe as you would hope. We were talking about the 131, and I don't know if I brought this up to you, but I actually like 113, just having those two extra people being, or the one extra person being set bottom lane, just because you have a better chance to zone people out in bottom lane, and protecting that lane is just a little bit easier. Protecting middle is hard because you need, you always will need at least 2 wards on opposing sides of the river, whereas bottom, sometimes you can get away with just using 1. So there's that idea as well, and like you mentioned, like once you take that turret, you have to decide what you're going to do. Like you have that advantage. You got that 150 gold for your entire team. But don't give up there. Don't give up with your strategy. Move down to bottom, send your solo to middle, take down that turret, and then you have another extra 150 gold. And make sure you play like usual, picking up the dragons. You have an advantage. Use that said advantage and really, keep the pressure on the opposition. Because not every time I've tried this. A number of times I've tried this. It's like we've taken the bottom turret when I did the 113. And then we just didn't know how to transition. We didn't know where people should go. We didn't want to push all the way to the second turret because then we were, too far into enemy territory, and we didn't have the coordination to be like, okay, we're going to go mid, you go bottom, and perhaps we didn't have a middle champion that would really do great against a 1v2 either. So regardless, you are going to need someone like Ajana, someone, perhaps Galio, Cho'Gath, someone who can really farm from a distance and be safe underneath their turret, and not have to worry about getting dove too much. And speaking on that front, you also don't really want to send a 1v2 against a kill lane like a Leona Graves, because they can dive turrets so easily. That can be really dangerous for your solo laner. I'm not certain if you really want to ban out champions because of that, because there's a lot of aggressive combinations, Taric, Leona, that can do that, Alistar in particular. But you do have to be careful that you're not matched up against a 2v1 lane that's going to be able to dive with impunity.
Yeah, and one of the main things is that jungle, because you don't have a dedicated jungler, but the idea is you're still taking those jungle buffs, you're still taking those, or you can take the jungle buffs, or you can counter jungle yourself, as you said, and you're developing an advantage. Even if you don't get as much farm from the jungle as you might with a jungler, you're developing a global gold advantage, and taking those towers will also help you take the dragons because you'll have better map control. So it's just really increasing your global goal, and that can really help your team out a lot.
Right. Yeah. It certainly can help out your team. This is kind of a new thing like we're talking about. Well, we've tried it. Somewhat decently. The thing is, when you get together these weird compositions, people start playing funny. Especially if you're not a group of 5. for the most part, only do this with a group of 5, so you don't, your teammates don't think you're trolling them. But but make sure everyone stays serious because you still want to win. You still want to play really well. It's very important that you stay at the top of your game because yes, it's a different strategy that is going to help out and potentially win you the game. But that doesn't mean you can play subpar all around. Your AD carry in the middle has to get all those CS. Like they have to be spot on with the CS because the 1v2 lane is going to be having more trouble getting CS and they're going to fall a little bit behind. And hopefully you get the middle behind based on just zoning them out and harassing them over and over. But yeah, I mean that's kind of the concern is that people won't take the game seriously when you're doing a unusual build.
I still contend that Hextech Revolver and Athena's Unholy Grail on Janna is legitimate.
I have no words for you. I have no words for you. That wasn't the only unusual thing. Because also since we're talking about a game that we played in, but since you're grouped up like more than you would be in other situations, like rushing an early Aegis or an early Zeke's makes even that much more sense. So if you're a support, be a support. That's Zero.
Yeah, in this game that we're talking about, I was a support Janna, not the support 1v2, and I went Hextech Revolver and Athena's Unholy Grail, which isn't exactly your standard support fare, but but I mean we won that game, so it was good. We did well.
I was still mad though because we had a chance to lose it because we were a lot of us weren't being serious. I probably wasn't being very serious myself. But, when you try these new and unusual things, don't try new and unusual crazy builds as well, because then you're not really giving the strategy a chance to flourish on its own.
Yeah, that is a good point. It is, and it's important to stick to the plan, because it can be tempting for, say, one of the middle champions to, want to go into the jungle more because there are those jungle camps that they want to clear. But the idea is to stick to the plan, push down turrets, and really do what you set out to do, instead of getting worried about things because it's not going as the games are going to be weird. They're going to be different, but you just have to remember to stick to the plan.
Yep, absolutely. Do you have anything else to add to that topic? Maybe we should go over ideal champions to run in middle. We already talked about that a little bit, but can you think of any more champions that would be great to have in that middle lane?
I really like Caitlyn as the AD carry in that mid lane because of her range, and really because of her range in early game is the important part.
I like Caitlyn too, but as I recall that game, didn't we were falling behind at some point, and it was a function that we had our AD carry who was Caitlyn, and Caitlyn doesn't have the greatest steroids, so in the mid game fights, when they didn't have Infinity Edge up, for instance, they would get the Nunu Blood Boil. I think I was Nunu in that game, was it not?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, so the Nunu Blood Boil and the shield from Janna, so that's 50 extra attack damage, 65 extra attack speed, so that certainly makes your AD carry, extra strong, but you have to realize, we don't actually have, multiple people that are doing a lot of damage. We have 2 people essentially not doing any damage, because they're not itemized for it, so they're really, falling behind as to the usual, progress of a champion. So we did have some issues, as I recall, in mid-game, where if we had someone who had a little bit better steroids, then they could have really helped us pull ahead, and there wouldn't have been that moment of weakness. Now I love Caitlyn because of her range, and I think she's really underestimated overall. But if you have someone like Tristana, who has a 90% attack speed bonus, or who else has a really good steroids? Ezreal actually has pretty good steroids, 50% attack speed, provided he's landing his skill shots. And even Kog'Maw, Kog'Maw might be an ideal champion. He doesn't really have great escapes, and he doesn't have great zoning potential early on, and he might be a little bit more susceptible to ganks, but he does have that really long range, and he does scale incredibly well into late game, so that's certainly another option.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason we like Caitlyn so much is because of that early game power, though. I mean, there was this one game where we ran this 1-3-1, and the Caitlyn, because of the Caitlyn of that range, we were able to, by the second wave, the tower was down to a third already. So, I mean, just getting that tower down that low that quickly is, it's huge, because you just need to put a little bit more pressure, and you can push down that turret, and then taking an early turret can be a huge benefit to your team because it's that much global gold, and it's earlier in the game, so you can really use that to help snowball your team basically, because you're going to develop more map control earlier on. And I mean, getting a lead earlier is always better.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's really going for that early game. The Caitlyn is really going for that really early game, trying to take that turret down as fast as possible. But as you said, I mean, there are other AD carries that could work well, that do scale better in the late game.
Yeah, and another kind of funny thing that you can do if you do want to play this strategy and be very silly about it, you can go top lane or bottom lane, depending on where you don't think they are, and really early on, just send everyone on your team to attack a turret, and you'll die to the turret. And make sure you don't get hit by enemies. Like if you see enemies, just run away. But you could probably do a good like 400, almost 500 damage to it if you have everyone get there at the same time. Everyone attack the turret, and then you should be able to get back into your lanes on time. So that's another thing I used to do with my friends all the time, and we kind of fell off. I think we stopped doing it after a couple times we got caught out, and the other team got an early like quadra kill, and we're like, seriously, how did this happen? But I mean, if you go to my top lane or bottom lane that you don't think is going to be protected, meaning namely it's not close to their red buff or their blue buff, then you should get some free damage on the turret. Might make you a little more susceptible to invades, but it's worth it. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, and one thing to note is that somebody should take for the masteries the what is it, Siege Commander? Is that the mastery where you
Right.
lower the armor of the turrets? And
Mhm.
you should also take the mastery doing more damage to turrets.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I mean, because that helps your team push down turrets faster. And so yeah, I mean that's what you want from masteries. In terms of runes, probably the standard runes that you would run on these champions. And actually, one champion that we have actually done in mid lane is a Heimerdinger. Um, so I mean,
Yeah.
Heimerdinger using those turrets to push, pretty good.
Yeah, it certainly works. I mean, Heimerdinger, kind of the redheaded stepchild of the AP middles nowadays, isn't played competitively, isn't played overall very much, but he does have great pushing power. He has probably the best pushing power of the AP middles. I suppose a Mordekaiser might be up there as well, but Heimerdinger certainly ahead of the game in that respect. And he doesn't need too many items where he can still be kind of be put in that support role,
Hmm.
relying on that blind,
Yeah,
relying on those turrets to help take down objectives.
in that game, it was Caitlyn, and then like Heimerdinger was more in the support role rather than in the AP
Mhm.
carry role. So yeah, I
Right.
mean it was just to help push, and we had that Caitlyn to shoot the towers at a range too. So yeah, I mean Heimerdinger is also an option because he has that great pushing power.
Yeah, and let's see who else might be an ideal support. Obviously, we didn't run Soraka, and I think we mentioned we might want to run Soraka just for the extra sustain in middle lane. That's really important because obviously, if you get chunked down, if the opposing middle does happen to get some damage off on you, then you're going to be in a tricky situation. And with pushing all the time, you're going to be near the turret. It is a possibility that you'll take a turret hit. So obviously, getting that heal really nice. Janna is great, but probably better in the 1v2 lane, as she can do that almost better than any champion. Nunu, as we mentioned before, a great champion. You don't really want to, use those really bruiser, aggressive supports, such as Leona. Probably not the best choice, but if you can get someone like Alistar, who can also jungle pretty well, then that's not a bad idea because you can, potentially steal their Wraith camp, take your own Wraith camp, and roam a little bit because you are giving up a lot of pressure on the other lanes. The other lanes are like, okay, well, we're not getting ganked. We see all three people middle. We see all five people on the map at all times. We know we're not getting ganked. Where if you get Alistar and give him some early boots of mobility, he can actually go to the other lanes, gank, and be pretty effective in kind of that, jungle ganking role without actually having to go into the jungle and without having to devote too much time to the ganking.
Yeah, and I mean, even if he is in that kind of jungle support, hybrid role, he can still take smite as even though he's not a dedicated jungler, because I mean, you having a smite is good on your team is good because of those buffs and because of the dragon and baron. So if you don't have a Nunu, you really want one of those supports to take that smite with them as one of their summoner spells. And I believe. Oh wait, yes, for the top lane, we haven't really talked about that much, but I mean, you can run a lot of standard champions up there because it could just be one of your standard top lane matchups. But
Mm.
I also like running somebody that can push a lot, because really the mid lane is going to demand a lot of the jungler's attention if they're going to gank.
Right.
Because, I mean, you have three champions there, you really need to gank that lane, or else your AP mid is just going to get completely denied. Somebody who can push up top can really do well, and that'll also help keep up the pressure up top as well, and prevent the enemy top laner from doing things like helping their jungler counter jungle you.
Hmm. And yeah, I mean, certainly a pushing champion, but you also have to make sure they're a safe champion because the jungler will likely go up there. Obviously, your top laner isn't going to get jungle support of his own, and the opposing top lane may or may not get jungle support. One of the only ways to deal with the, extra man in middle or extra man in bottom is to really devote jungler's attention down there. And then if you do that, if you force the jungler to stay around at all times, then you're actually starving him a farm that he could otherwise be getting as well, provided you don't die to him. And that'll give him, a significant amount of gold. But, if you have that, 3-on-1 advantage, then, the jungler shouldn't really be able to make a big difference, shouldn't be able to get kills off, because when he comes, it'll be a 3-on-2. You do, of course, have to keep track of the top lane, of that bottom lane also.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's you. The goal here is to push, and I mean, you still have to take into account the jungler about ganks and stuff. But I mean, try to push as safely as you can and as hard as you can with that while you're pushing safely. So I mean, take those early turrets, take objectives, and get global gold.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yep. That's basically it. I mean, there are some worries about late game. You might not be getting as much farm as the other team, and I mean, you might not have the ideal team composition. But I mean, I found in the games that I've played that we've actually done well in later game team fights because we've been able to still develop an advantage using the global gold and from those objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what else to add to it. I mean, we obviously think it's a good idea. I mean, we always want to try it out more. We want to try out different and new things all the time, and that is what the show is about. Meta Musing, of course, brought to you by GG Chronicle. I don't know what our topic for next week is, but we will, as always, be bringing you another unusual support to talk about. Teemo was our talked about support champion this week, and I really feel like he is an ideal pick. Like, if you want to pick someone that's not standard, like Teemo is going to be able to do the job as a support. We did talk about Anivia last week, and I feel she lacks in a lot of respects, but Teemo actually has great things going for him, especially in the early laning phase.
Yep. So that is all for today. Thanks for listening. You can actually catch us tomorrow casting the GG Classic.
Yeah.
So I think we have the first game of the day. Am I correct in that?
I think so. I would don't have to double check the schedule. But that is how I recall it. They keep on swapping it up on us. But if it is the first game today, it'll be at 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time, so noon Eastern time, 9 p.m. Pacific time. That is when the show will start, regardless of whether or not we're doing it. But I do think we are doing it, so certainly tune on in if you want to get your fill of Zero and Sotere, doing a little bit of casting for the GG Classic. And I mean, we have a really great weekend of matches. I'm super stoked on them. Of course, some great teams knocked out a lot of the more popular teams, so we don't have, CLG Prime, CLG EU, TSM Evo, but we have the teams that beat them, which is certainly important.
And we have MTWNA with the Rain Man as their top, so should be a lot of fun
Team
to watch.
Dynamic with Atlanta in their jungle.
Yeah.
So there's kind of unusual side stories, unusual but very exciting side stories into the GG Classic, where teams are trying out their new components, and so far it's been going really well for both teams.
Yeah, and so I mean, there should be a lot of exciting games for you guys to watch. So definitely tune into that. Yep, and remember to tune in to Meta Musings next week, same time, same place.
Same time, same place.
Yep. Thanks for watching. Have a good night, guys.
Have a good night.
So yeah, I still have no idea when I should cut this.
It is tough. Wait at least 30 seconds. Although I don't know how long our delay is now. I think it might only be like 10 seconds.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Alright, I'm just gonna stop it now.